Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Human Rights, the show in which we discuss all things related to human rights. I'm your host, Julz Allender, and I'm part of the California chapter of Youth for Human Rights International. Youth for Human Rights International's purpose is to enlighten and educate people around the world on what their human rights are, with specific focus on the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And with this education, to enable and inspire the youth of today as our leaders of tomorrow to stand up and secure these rights for themselves and all people on earth. As you know, for each show, we like to take up one right and try to broaden your understanding of how this right is important to you and your loved ones. And for today's show, we will be looking at human right number 9, no unfair detainment, which states, "No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile." Now let's take a look at a short video about this specific human right.
Anybody out there? This isn't right. Honey, just tell me what I did, please. Can somebody just tell me? God, I should talk to somebody. Let me go.
Let's examine these ideas a little more closely. In civilized countries and political systems, the right to a public trial has been recognized as a basic right for every individual prior to any kind of incarceration. Too often, in tyrannical societies, prison is used as a way to silence opposition. It is a method of controlling people by threatening them with a loss of freedom, by using the excuse that is their behavior that is the problem, that their behavior is endangering society. What is missed is that the unrest is created by prior injustices committed by the existing leaders. And it is that behavior that needs to change, not the behavior of the average citizen who protests a bad government. The idea that any prison sentence must be preceded by a fair and public trial is the protection the average citizen has from this kind of tyrannical behavior. Societies are diverse and varied. The ideas that roam through all the societies are equally diverse. Freedom is the right to express those ideas and to listen to them and form your own opinion. Freedom is the right to change your mind after hearing another's opinion or not change your mind despite the good argument another gave you. But using the threat of incarceration to change others' mind or way of thinking has nothing to do with freedom. For this reason, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights includes no unfair detainment as one of the basic freedoms all human beings should enjoy. But there are lots of types of prisons. When a prison is mentioned, we may think only of the police and jail of bars and barbed wire, large institutions that warehouse bad people who have been convicted justly in a court system. These institutions are controlled by the police and the court systems. But that is just one type of prison. There is also the whole of the psychiatric industry that has its institutions and methods of jailing someone, either physically or with drugs. Did you know that anyone can be brought in front of a judge and deprived of all of their rights without ever having committed a crime? This is the subject of involuntary commitment. In this scenario, if your behavior is deemed inappropriate or unacceptable, the state can commit you to a psychiatric institution with no determination on when you will be released or how you can pursue your freedom. In essence, your rights have been turned over to a doctor who now acts on your behalf. And this doctor is paid as long as you are in their care. So there is a built-in conflict of interest here. The problem is the care that is given is for the most part heavy psychotropic drugs, which in themselves incapacitates the individual further and makes them more dependent upon the institution for their survival. This creates a cycle of mental deterioration that further justifies institutional. Let me give that to you again. This creates a cycle of mental deterioration that further justifies institutionalization and then more drugs and more institutionalization. Prisons, as necessary as they are in our current society, are supposed to be places where we can hold people who have acted in a way that damages and endangers society until they can be rehabilitated enough to re-enter society. That people are not rehabilitated, but rather punished, is often overlooked. For most people, the idea of losing their human rights for a period of time and being incarcerated is a strong enough deterrent to curb antisocial behavior, meaning the justice system works on them. But then there are those that no amount of penalty or threat will stop them from acting in a manner that is damaging to others. And by damaging another, I'm talking about real physical harm or stealing, not having an opinion that you or another believes is harmful. It is these people that are beating or killing or stealing or damaging property and damaging others that necessitates a prison system. And the simple truth is, it is these people who also need rehabilitation. And there is no real evidence that simply incarcerating a person who has committed a serious offense against the society that they live in will stop or change their behavior simply by being punished. Yet, there is plenty of evidence that they, once released, will continue to act in the same manner that put them in prison in the first place. Recidivism is the phenomena of a convict going back out in society, committing more crimes, only to be caught and returned to prison. Per the American Justice Department, a study released in March of 2022 said 10 years after release, 82% of state prisoners had been arrested again. Let me give that to you again. In 10 years after release, 82% of state prisoners had been arrested again, an average of nearly 7 arrests each. And the majority of those prisoners, 62% of them, had also returned to prison. This is empirical evidence that simply incarcerating another human being has not and will not change our society for the better. And now we will get into our interview for today. We are going to be talking about an unjustly fact, an unjustly crime, and a crime that is one of the most, in my opinion, dangerous, gruesome, and awful crimes that do exist. And I'm going to bring on my guest, who is the Assistant Director of Pillars of Hope, an organization to combating human trafficking, and that is Morgan Gleeson. Hello, Morgan.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I appreciate your time. So let's start off and tell me about your organization. What is it that you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Pillars of Hope Incorporated is a nonprofit organization. We are dedicated and committed to being a part of the fight against human trafficking and combating modern day slavery. Specifically, we provide direct services to any individual that has been trafficked or is currently being trafficked. Whether that be through programs that we can assist them in, to paying for flights if they have been traveled across the country or into another country. We assist with that type of trafficking as well. Overall, our dedication is really just to assist any individual that has experienced trafficking or is experiencing being trafficked.
Excellent. Yeah, it's It's a gruesome industry, and I'm sure that you've come across many individuals whose story is probably heartbreaking. Is that true?
Absolutely. I think any case of human trafficking is truly just so tragic. And due to the demand of trafficking and how big it has gotten in the world today, there are so many different cases and so many different ages and so many different people that experience it. I think over time it's more talked about now, but even the ages for human trafficking vary between 4 to 21. And so there really is just an endless amount of people that are victims to this awful crime.
Yeah, and so what does one do with a 4-year-old in a human trafficking scenario?
Yeah, I think it very varies. Many children, it's usually sex trafficking with children, which is just completely horrible. Most trafficking cases are familial, so a lot of times it could be parents, uncles, siblings, cousins, distant relatives. And so, in terms of children, it's a really, really delicate situation because a lot of the times you're dealing with families that they trust, people that they have relationships with, which makes the scenario just so much more complicated and difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrific to talk about and think about. And so when you say it's typically, we're talking about a younger child, it's a familial.
Mhm.
Are you saying that they sell their child, or that that child is then abused sexually by a family member?
Mm. Every case is different. From my experience, many cases where a child is being sold for any type of intimacy by a family member, they're usually being sexually assaulted or harassed by that family member as well. To be in a situation where somebody's selling their child, a lot of times it's a really unhealthy environment. There's usually abuse already involved in the home, or you're dealing with kids in the foster care system, adoption families, really any type of environment that isn't a normal day to day where there are risk factors involved for kids or individuals. A lot of the times, though, if they are being trafficked as a child, they are also receiving some type of or level of abuse at home as well.
Got it. And so you mentioned it briefly, but what is your approach to handling the horrors of human trafficking?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Pillars of Hope, we do have a kind of a we have 5 pillars that we stick to as an organization, as a company. They're awareness, intervention, restoration, transition, and reintegration. With these pillars, we emphasize with awareness, kind of educating the community or educating ourselves and people around us about human trafficking. It's one of those topics where it's a horrible, dark part of the world, yet it's just not talked about enough. In terms of intervention, that's where we step in with our services, where we will intervene and interact with sex workers on the street, with victims who call us, family members that have fears about other people or themselves. And so that's how we intervene as an organization. In terms of restoration, we like to emphasize on kind of restoring a confidence in them and helping kind of working hand in hand with them and showing them that support that we are here to help them. And then the transition is where we get into the program aspect of it. There's different phases when it comes to restoring someone back into society who has been trafficked. Initially, they have to, go through a detox if they're on drugs. They have to, stay at a hotel for a couple of days before they can be even moved to a transition house or a rescue house. And if they are go through detox and they stay at a hotel and they've been cleared, they go into a rescue house. This is usually a temporary situation for them to get their feet underneath them, to educate them on programs that are accessible to them, different avenues they can take. And then the final step is in a transition house, which is a long-term house that really helps them rehabilitate back into society. Many times there's programs, there's different therapy sessions, different services that they can have at these houses. And so for us specifically, right now, we are very strong in the outreach. We go to Vallejo, California, where we have what is called the Blade. The Blade is in many different cities across the United States as well. There's one in Sacramento, California. There's one in Stockton, California. The one that we directly work on is in Vallejo, California. This is where we get to interact and meet different individuals who work in the sex world, many of them are being trafficked. We have a lot of interactions with pimps, individuals who work for pimps. And so for us directly, we outreach is a huge part of our day to day.
Yeah, I think the outreach part um, is priceless, right? And I want to back up a little bit. You know, I've interviewed hundreds of different organizations in the field of human rights over the last several years. And I have to say that human trafficking and child sex trafficking have been the most, we have interviewed more organizations in the area. And to me, that just tells me how much of an issue it is, how, in all these points that you're talking about, it's not talked about enough, right? There's not enough prevention, there's not enough education, there's not enough solutions into the other underlying issues that actually forces one into or causes one to get into any type of human trafficking, whether it's labor or sex trafficking, right? I just, every time I bring someone else on, it just astonishes me how much is just not talked about and what new information that actually is presented by this organization. I'm like, oh yeah, I've probably interviewed 35 to 40 groups in this. I'm curious to see I'm gonna find out, and always something more. And I think one of the issues, especially in the United States, is we just don't think it occurs here. We just don't think that it's going to happen to our child or our family neighbor or our neighbor. And if we're in a specific societal class, it doesn't touch us and it doesn't affect us. And we can look down on when we see sex workers, prostitutes, things of that nature, and have an assumed opinion and not really know the truth behind it, which I'm going to ask you a couple questions about. However, I do want to get back to this 4-year-old child, because the age always, no matter how many times I've heard stories, which is heartbreaking, an age that young, it always sticks with me. So I guess my question is, after all of that pre-question communication to you, when we're talking about 4-year-olds and young childs, is this happening in the United States?
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to human trafficking, except as especially child sex trafficking, this is something that happens in probably every single community in the world, if not all of them, most of them. And I think what you said about living in the United States, it's not talked about enough, and people just don't know. You could live in a very nice suburban neighborhood with great neighbors, and your family comes over for barbecues, and there could be a child or an individual being trafficked down the block, or even next door, or 2 houses down. It's one of those things where this is human trafficking is something that there is no discrimination in human trafficking. Any person can be trafficked, any child can be trafficked. And there is so much information that people never receive when it comes to human trafficking, when it comes to risk factors, things to look out for, the way the internet plays into it, all of these things that lead into the possibility of being trafficked, and it's just not talked about. And so in the United States, especially with how populated we are as a country, with how technologically advanced we are, with all these different characteristics of our country, human trafficking is 1,000,000% so possible and is currently happening every day across the country.
Yeah, across the country, like you said, across the world. I think it's easy to live in, and it's not just the United States, but, higher class societies. And I don't mean that demeaning to anything, anybody, or any place in the country, but you can look around and have a standard of living and you go, well, this must happen elsewhere.
Mhm.
And the truth of the matter is it happens everywhere. And the fact that it happens everywhere is disgusting and it's horrifying to me. So yeah, thank you for that. Now, in terms of, you said that you guys go out and you do a lot of proactive work with sex workers and prostitutes. My understanding is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, definitely, is that there is I don't know if it's a majority or not. I think this is where my question is going to go. But it is very real that some percentage of them are trafficked and they have a pimp and they are somewhat sex slaves.
Yeah, absolutely. obviously there is the interacting with a sex worker or somebody who does work on the street. We're never going to get the full picture of their life. A lot of times they won't even talk to us. Sometimes they even run away from us. When we do talk to someone, we go up, we offer them chapstick that has human trafficking hotline on it. Sometimes we'll offer some type of food because a lot of times they're starving. We'll pray with them. We'll try to offer any services that we can in that moment. If we can, if there's a bed available at different shelters, we'll take them off the street right then and there. However, I think due to how little information we get, it's really impossible to know. And this goes to something I'm sure we'll talk about later on as well. It's really impossible to know who is there willingly and who is not.
Mm.
It is safe to assume that most of the sex workers that we're interacting with are being trafficked. Because these are, young girls that are walking up and down a very specific street in very revealing clothes with no form of protection for themselves. Um, we also can see, different pimps that are driving around that are watching the girls, that are seeing if they're talking to anybody, especially when you have, a group of people walk up to them. We're obviously not purchasing services. Those are situations where pimps will watch to ensure that any of the sex workers don't interact with us, they don't go with us, anything to pretty much force and to ensure that they don't leave the job that they are currently being enslaved to do.
Right. And then, and so you kind of touched on this, but what kind of difficulties do people run into? I'm sorry. Trying to get out of that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, human trafficking is, in my opinion, in my experience, one of the darkest parts of the world. This is an action where it destroys a person to their core, not even physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It tears apart every aspect of a human being. The identity that we hold just as human beings is stripped away from us, and people come out of this with feeling, I mean, there's just so many different stories, and many of them just even express what they lost just as a human being, what they no longer have. But some of the difficulties that people run into vary, in terms of a physical aspect. Many may have physical disabilities from drastic and horrible physical abuse that they not only receive from their traffickers, but also from people that they were trafficked to. Most will have severe mental health issues, PTSD. They will struggle in social situations. Any form of employment may become difficult for them. Some of them have no form of education or high school diploma. Um, and even relationships with family, friends, or a partner of any kind will always be difficult for them, and trust will be something that they'll have to work through, whether it's through counseling or any form of rehabilitation. And I think a big thing too is they'll always, there's this point of finding peace and coming out of a life like that, of something so dangerous and so dark, and finding peace through that is really, really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't even imagine or fathom, you know, I just, it's hard to put yourself in that position. It's hard to have judgment. The only thing you can have is empathy,
Mhm.
and resources like you guys are providing. Um, I lost my train of thought here. Oh yeah. So in terms of, so you have individuals who are, let's say they're trafficked in the prostitution ring, and then you have um, children who've been sexually abused, and you have maybe children who've been picked out by families or things of that nature, and whatever else, or different ways that one can get trafficked. Do you find that there's, based on their situation, I guess two questions here. One, is there any common denominators of how they got into that situation? Like what led them there? Not that it was a personal thing, but maybe an exterior environmental. And do they have different hardships coming out of it?
I think in terms of being brought into the life of being trafficked and working, and being victimized in that way, there are risk factors that one can know about and be educated on that lead to it. Um, in for a child situation, whether they're a young child or they're in high school, any home life that is abusive or anything that falls under that characteristic of neglect, abuse, sexual assault, anything like that are risk factors that can lead into being trafficked. Whether it's even for a child's case, they grow up in a home, they're abused, they're neglected, the people that are supposed to love them most have completely destroyed them. As they get older, their view on relationships may be altered based off of those experiences, and it can lead into them being in a relationship with somebody who treats them just as badly, and then that partner starts trafficking them. And so that's a very specific scenario that does happen. Um, and those are risk factors that affected an individual that led to that situation. But when it comes to entering the life, it could go from you live in a horrible, your home life is horrible and you're abused, or you could live in suburbia and you could be just a regular great family that goes to church every Sunday or has great relationships. And it's something that a family member does or even a friend does to you. I think when it comes to being trafficked, there really is no blueprint for being
Mm.
trafficked. But there are risk factors. Obviously, I always encourage you know, children, whether they're young children or high school, to be wary of social media. It's always important. Don't talk to strangers on the internet. Don't talk to strangers day to day. Don't go to someone's house that you don't know. Don't go places by yourself. Especially as, a young woman in the world, I think it's always important to educate, you know, women about the threats that to their lives. For human trafficking, the highest percentage is women and young girls are trafficked more than men and young boys. Men and young boys are trafficked. However, women and young girls do take up the main number of trafficking victims. And so I think there's really so many different ways to be trafficked, but there are risk factors to look out for and just continuing to set yourself up for success as a young adult, as a young person, and for families, being aware of who their children are spending time with, where they're going, and just keeping track of those tiny details can really alter whether or not someone enters the life of human trafficking.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Thank you for all that. And you mentioned, potentially like someone doing something to a child, whether it's a family member or a friend, and just for educational purposes, if I'm a parent or I'm even a youth, like what would be examples of some of those things where I might go, start to become more aware or be alert, like, yeah, that probably was not good. I need to probably report that.
Absolutely. I think in terms of a relationship where they don't know the person, stranger danger is relevant from back then and it's relevant now. Any stranger that approaches you as a child or as a high school student, there is no reason, unless your parents know who they are and they told you they know who they are. Any form of social media obviously is so big in today's world. Not talking to strangers on social media. I do know that social media has kind of romanticized um, be kind of putting your life out there and putting your life on social media. I always think this is something that the less information that people have about you when it comes to situations like this, the better. Because if there's one thing a trafficker is going to do, there's what I've learned is there's three very specific ways, and I'm sure there are more, but when we've broken it down, there's three very specific ways that traffickers manipulate individuals, and that's force, fraud, or coercion. When it comes to coercion, you're looking at traffickers that are manipulating people. And so, as a child or as someone who's in high school, as a young adult who's at risk to being trafficked, you have to realize knowing when you're being manipulated, knowing this person, I don't know who they are, they got this information from this place. I think those are really, really important things, especially with the way that social media is used today, the way that traffickers are able to talk to kids and talk to young individuals. I think that's just one way of don't talk to people you don't know or talk to people that have nothing to do with your life. There's never any reason. For
Don't send
parents,
them nudes, right? We learned
yeah,
that, yeah.
don't send pictures of yourself. Don't go on dates, don't go places and don't tell friends or family. You could always tell at least one friend where you're going, or even taking a friend with you. And so I think those are just small ways in terms of people you do know when it comes to children and young adults or kids in high school. When it comes to people you do know, it's a really slippery slope in that situation because this is a relationship that this individual has probably had their entire life or for a very long time. And so when it comes to trafficking in the case where it's familial and it's from the trafficker's a friend or a parent or an uncle or cousin or any type of relative, there are signs where they try to be alone with you a lot. They touch you inappropriately, whether that be your waist, any private parts. They tell you, I think a big thing I see a lot is family members being like, "Oh, you're our special kid." Like for
Mm,
a young girl, it's like you're my special girl. Like they build up this relationship and they build this trust and this foundation that's of with love and trust, and then they use that to manipulate a child. And in those cases, I think parents being aware of their kids' whereabouts is really, really important.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. It's very helpful, very important information. Now, going back to the resources, are there times when you cannot help someone who needs your help because you don't have the resources?
Absolutely. I think because human trafficking is not talked about enough, there are not enough organizations or people working in this field, doing a job against human trafficking. And so, three of the main things I think that we struggle with is the number one is beds and facilities. There is not enough rescue houses or transitional houses for individuals who have been trafficked, who have these experiences and they have to work through them. There's not enough places for them to go to be rehabilitated back into society. A lot of them either stay in the life until, they die or they have nowhere to go. All the relationships with their family have been severed. And there's just not anywhere for them to go, and there's not enough organizations doing this work. I
Mm,
think that's one of our biggest things. We collaborate with a lot of different organizations. And so when we do street outreach and we're talking to girls, we always make sure that there's a bed available at one of the shelters. And these shelters aren't even specific to anti-human trafficking.
mhm,
These shelters are specific to domestic violence, homeless. So we don't even have a shelter that we can, send individuals who are being trafficked that is going to be specific to them, that will have the correct tools for them. And so that's a really big resource that doesn't exist
mm,
as much as it should. That makes it hard. I think even with that, with the shelters, they're not open on weekends. And so if we
mm.
get a phone call on a weekend that somebody needs help, these shelters that we want to send these individuals to aren't open on weekends and we can't even send them. We're like,
Oh
can you
my
wait till
gosh.
Monday? And that's just because there's not enough people in this type of career. Um, I think other comes it's that there's a massive lack of programs for women with children. A really big MO today is that traffickers will impregnate their victims and then they will hold the baby over their head, whether it's I'm going to traffic the baby, I'm going to hurt the baby, and women will stay in the life to protect their child. And there is a severe lack of programs for women who are being trafficked that have children. And that plays a big part. My organization, we're currently in the process of um, building our rescue house and we're receiving funding for it. And one of the very specific things that we've done is we ensured that we set up the program that we can accept women with children. Another even resource that is lacking across the board is there's a lack of programs for men and young boys. They are trafficked less than women are, especially when it comes to sex trafficking. However, men and young boys are trafficked can be trafficked the same way that women can and that what young girls can. And there's a severe lack of programs for them, even to the point that some shelters, they can't take men or boys that have been trafficked because they have, women and young girls who are being
Mm,
trafficked, who were trafficked by men.
mm.
And so to put them in the same organization or the same shelter would be more harmful to more people. And so those are just some things that make our job a little bit harder than it already is.
Yeah, I think when you say little bit, it's an understatement.
Yeah.
It's quite a task. And I assume, you spoke about women with children and not wanting to come out, right? Because, and I would assume that sometimes when you're reaching out to individuals, that the fear of being caught and the fear of those ramifications by whoever's trafficking them tends to outweigh or is a very strong reason as to why they don't ask for help. Is that safe to say?
Absolutely. When it comes to being trafficked and the three ways I brought up earlier, which is force, fraud, and coercion, those are very broad characteristics of trafficking somebody. But when it comes to being trafficked, these traffickers and pimps and these people that are doing this, they are altering a human being's, the way their brain works, the way they understand things. They put them in the darkest part of the world they possibly can, and they isolate them completely, and they break them down, and people's brain chemistry and how they understand situations changes to survival of the fittest. And for most of them, they think surviving is if they try to leave, they'll be hurt, whether it's through physical abuse or whether it's somebody they care about.
Mm.
When it comes to fraud, these are false promises that these traffickers are making to people, whether it's wages, working conditions, support around a job. And when it comes to coercion, like we talked about earlier, it's just severe manipulation. And you are just completely lying to this person. And to be able to do that and for someone to believe you and to be trafficked in that way, it really does change the way you think about situations. And you don't even realize that you could get out because you're living in this such a dark part of the world.
Right. And how many of these individuals are typically on drugs?
So it is hard with statistics in human trafficking because the statistics that exist, we can 1,000% assume are not accurate and probably five times higher. Because this numbers that do exist are specific to cases that are reported,
Mm.
and I couldn't even imagine how many cases go unreported.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of drugs and human trafficking, I believe personally and from my experience, go toe and toe. Generally, a lot of these victims are on fentanyl. Fentanyl is really big right now in the trafficking world and even in the drug world. And because human trafficking does fall into gang violence, drug violence, it definitely falls under that category with it. And so a lot of these cases, these individuals are on severe amount of drugs, which is where the detox period comes into place. Before anybody who's being trafficked can join a rescue house and then go into a transitional house, they have to go through a detox period where we can evaluate their drug level, if they are on drugs, their addiction level, and it's a huge, huge part of trafficking.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm going to go a little off topic or whatever here. You know, I started doing these interviews. Obviously, you see situations like this in movies and TV shows, and you go, oh, that's really rough. Not sure it happens, but, And then it's exactly how it happens. They get hooked on drugs. They're kidnapped or whatever. They're coerced. They're made to believe that they're loved by a new boyfriend, right? You get someone who, like you had brought up earlier, their home life was rough. Maybe they were abused physically, emotionally. They're looking for some love, and they get into these relationships, and the boyfriend ends up, being a trafficker and being a pimp, who before you find out, starts doing drugs with you, this one time, just this one time, just this one favor. And then you realize, before you know it, probably that you're now hooked on fentanyl, which anyone who knows anything about drugs is horrific. And you're in a situation that, like you said, you can't think for yourself. You're in fear. You're probably lacking, severe amounts of nutrition to be able to physically and mentally comprehend or come up with any solutions. But as much as that, and I don't know if it's promoted on TV or it's in movies or if it's someone is just describing a scene, but we surely have seen more and more and more. It's not like it's gotten any better, so it's an interesting thing to look at.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. Even my own story and testimony of how I got into working in this career, I I knew nothing about human trafficking. I was in college. I picked a specific degree about criminal justice. I knew I wanted to work in the field, but I didn't know what to do. One day in a dorm, I did research and I just did a 6 hour deep dive into human trafficking. And I cried so much and it was so sad. But it really was something where I was an 18-year-old girl who lived in a country where I had all these resources available to me to be educated on this topic, but no one had ever talked to me about it.
Yeah.
And it was something where I knew nothing about it. The only experience I had about it was I watched a movie called Taken and I was like 14. And that was about as far as my experience or knowledge about human trafficking had gone. And I, in my mind, I was like, this happens in other countries. It doesn't happen here. And then when I got into the career and I dedicated my education to and I did all my internships, I realized that this is something that happens right next to us every day. And I remember my first case that I ever did, and it was in the hometown that I grew up in, and I just couldn't believe it. And it was such a horrible case. And it was my first case, so I was just trying not to cry in the briefing at that
Yeah.
point. But it really was an eye opener for me to realize that this is just not talked about. And I think there's a reason behind it. I think that, if we talked about human trafficking more, I think there would be more safety things put into place for young adults, for women, for all these things that we don't have right now. I think there would be more to protect, especially young adults and young children from such a horrible thing like human trafficking. And there's just so many things that are difficult to educate on, and so many people just aren't educated. And I think it's the leading problem of human trafficking is that people just don't know.
Yeah. I agree. I agree 100%, and I don't think we need to state that it is very clear it is a violation of your human rights and multiple human rights, and you don't ever have to be in any situation like that or even close to it. So, yeah, I agree. It needs to be talked about more, hence one of the reasons why you do what you do and we do what we do here, and we've interviewed a tremendous amount of organizations in the area, and to your point, again, even though it's still not enough,
Yeah.
which is always shocking to me. And if you can briefly share just some statistics around human trafficking.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of cases that go unreported in human trafficking is probably 5 times more than the cases that are reported of trafficking victims. Polaris Project is a phenomenal organization. Their statistics are as accurate as they can be from our experience. Just in 2023, reported cases were 9,000 in the United States. We
Wow.
can probably assume that this number is about 5 times higher. And that's just the United States. I've heard certain statistics where we're talking about 40 billion people in the world are trafficked every single year. And so, in terms of that broad number, we can assume that what we have is not accurate enough. But in terms of other numbers, over 50% of human trafficking cases are familial. That's
Wow.
where these are, traffickers that know children, women, boys, men, like and I'm sure that number is even higher in reality. Women and girls do account for about 75% of trafficked victims globally, and that in terms of sex trafficking, about 96% they make up
Wow.
when it comes to sex trafficking. And so labor trafficking does have a higher number of um, labor trafficking has a lower number than sex trafficking, but women and men and girls and boys can be labor trafficked, and men and boys can be sex trafficked as well. I think, especially with that case, a lot of men and young boys don't say anything, and that's from there's a lack of programs, that's from a stigma that they're not supposed to talk about it. And so those are just a couple of statistics, but I always like to make it clear like we can assume that they're not as accurate as they would be just due to the amount of cases that always go unreported. Even girls or individuals we talk to on the street, I've never seen one of them call the police when we're
Right.
talking to them to make a report. And
Right.
we talk to hundreds of people a year.
Yeah. Yikes. It's a lot.
Absolutely.
All right. And then talk to us about what is next for you and your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So for Pillars of Hope, we do a lot of collaboration events, especially because as a nonprofit, our fundraising situation will look different than a for-profit company. Right now, coming up is our annual golf tournament. It is our biggest fundraiser that we host every single year. It is the income that drives our victim assistance program. And so if you ever wanted to go for a great cause, this is the opportunity. We have many different partnership opportunities from an individual sign up to company sponsorships, raffle basket donations, or even just donations in general. This is our fourth annual golf tournament that we've put on. It's a really fun event. We try to make it great. And obviously, it being the income that's driving our victim assistance program makes us work 10 times harder on it to ensure that we still have this. And so I think that that's coming up. And then one of our collaborations with another organization in Mexico, the organization is called Church Mexico. They're a wonderful organization that emphasizes on educating different communities in Mexico about um, human trafficking, which is where we're coming in to educate a specific community about it. But they also have other missions, such as teaching women how to sew to give them opportunities to get a job, teaching women about relationships and pretty much how they don't need to stay in abusive ones. And so that's a collaboration we're really excited for. I myself will be traveling to Mexico. I'll be a key speaker where we'll get to talk to families on the first day about human trafficking, what it looks like, how it affects their community. And then we'll separate women and young girls and then husbands and young boys. And we'll get to talk to women and young girls about risk factors to watch out for, kind of open up the ability for them to open up to us if they are experiencing any type of abuse or being trafficked by anybody in their life at all, or any situations that they know. And so those are just two things coming up for Pillars that we're very, very excited about.
Yeah, both great events. I might see you at your golf tournament, but
We'd love to have you.
yeah, that's great that you guys are going down to Mexico. And that brings me to a question slash maybe comment here. In terms of, how do I want to say this? I know that in other areas of the world, the fact that some women don't have jobs does lead them into the sex industry a little easier. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, if you take an individual and they have to leave school at a young age, so they don't have an education, and because they don't have an education, they weren't able to get a job, so they have no experience. And so, as a woman in those situations, a lot of them marry and they'll enter into a relationship for some type of sustainability. And when that happens, a lot of times, and I don't think most of the time, but in a lot of situations, those types of relationships can lead into abuse, which can lead into being trafficked. And then they have nowhere to go. And then
Right.
the situation is, I'm being abused at home. I have nowhere to go. I can try and leave and find a different relationship, but there's a chance that they're abusive too. And so they stay in those relationships, and they have a lot of them will have children and they want to support their children, and they know that they can't support their children on their own. And so they would rather continue to take physical and emotional and mental abuse and even the possibility of being trafficked to protect themselves and their family to the fullest extent that they can.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, comes to empowering different communities about education,
Yeah.
empowering programs that are supporting young adults about getting an education, getting a career, and building these tools that you can utilize to make a better life for yourself.
Yeah. Knowledge is power, skill, having a skill set and ability to be independent, not that you shouldn't have a family, but it is a very powerful thing. So excellent. Well, good. So as we come to the close of our interview, we ask every guest this final question, and that is, what is your favorite human right and why?
I went back and forth between two of them because I felt like they tie hand in hand in my career, what I do. I felt like the human right number three, which is everyone has the right to life, and then four, which is no one should be held in slavery and servitude. For my career specifically, I believe that they tie in hand because the way that human trafficking is, you're taking away this person's life. And they have, they're a lot of times they're a skeleton of who they are, and they're forced to do something that they don't want to do, and they're forced to be modern day slaves. And I think a lot of people don't want to talk about that, and I think those stuck out to me, and I feel so passionate about those. For me personally, I believe I had a great life. I had so many opportunities. I got to go to college, and I'm a 24-year-old woman, and that could have been me in any scenario. And so I think I feel so passionate about those because so many other individuals deserve to have this life that are they have a right to and that they're promised to. And I think for those two tie in hand in hand so beautifully, because when somebody is enslaved, their life is taken away from them. And I think at that point, what are they living for except for the possibility of getting out?
I think you're absolutely correct. Two very important points. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Morgan. It was great talking to you. Very happy that you took the time to be with us today, and thank you for all the work that your organization does on this horrifying topic that a lot of people can't confront. So, and especially being so young, it's incredible that what you do day in and day out. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us. We're just happy to talk about the organization and talk about what we're doing. Any type of communication or any type of outward express, like us expressing what we do, is just one step in the right direction against human trafficking. So thank you so much. We're so happy to be here, and I'm honored to be able to represent my organization.
You're very welcome. All right, well, that's our show for this week. I hope you got some valuable information on a very, very important topic. You share it with your friends, you share it with your family, ensure that everyone understands and is aware of human trafficking and child sex trafficking and all of the different aspects, and you know what to look out for. And yeah, thank you for your time. Until next time, I will see you then.